go. It says we're streaming.
Okay. I'm going to dip out. You guys have a great convo. I'll be watching and feeding this out to as many pages as possible.
Thanks so much, John.
You're welcome.
Good evening, Facebook. My name's Chuck Fagan, and this is a special presentation of the Better Savannah Facebook page. We'll be having a discussion tonight with the Democratic nominee for the Public Service Commission of the state of Georgia. The Public Service Commission is probably one of the most utilized, kind of under the radar commissions in this state, and it impacts everybody every single day, every single month. We did invite the Republican nominee. We're in talks to have both nominees on this program tonight to have this discussion. Unfortunately, the Republican nominee, Bubba McDonald, declined to attend in the last few days. We do appreciate him at least considering it, though. So we're happy to have Daniel here. We're also happy to have friend of the committee and longtime environmental leader, activist, Chatham County Democratic Committee member, Mr. Steve Willis, to help lead the discussion for this important position that is up for election on the same ballot in the January 5th runoff in 2021 here in just 4 weeks, okay? Mr. Steve Willis is a Vietnam veteran specializing in intelligence from 1969 to 1970 with a master's from George Mason University in history. He also has 25 years with the federal government in Washington, D.C., mostly in policy management and computer systems. He retired to Mexico and then came here to Savannah with 20 years of environmental and political activism. He ran in 2008 for Chatham County Commission and is the former chair of the Sierra Club of Coastal Georgia and vice chair of the Sierra Georgia chapter. He's now board president of the Center for a Sustainable Coast, and in his spare time is a figurative and landscape painter. Steve, I appreciate you joining us tonight to lead this discussion. Before we let you take it away with your introduction and some questions, I just want to give a second to introduce our guest, Mr. Daniel Blackman, who is the nominee for Public Service Commission for the Democratic Party. Daniel, why don't you just give us a quick introduction, and then we'll let Steve take it away.
First of all, man, you know, this is homecoming to be able to see you, man. And shout out to Savannah. Steve, thank you for your service. My father was a United States Army Ranger. He was Delta Force. And so you and the work you've done, and for all military families that are watching and those who served, thank you so much, sir. And looking forward to the conversation. I'm looking forward to letting the people know more about me. I'm a kid that grew up in Columbus, Georgia. I have a ton of history in environmental policy and energy policy in the U.S., especially in the years of the Obama administration. And that has kind of translated into more of a global impact around actually following science as it relates to climate change and the global impact of the decisions we make as it relates to our utilities and our power generation. So I'm happy to be a part of this conversation. I'm going to make this as simple as possible so that we don't go over anyone's head. But I know there's a lot of serious conversations and topics we want to talk about. So I'm just here to have fun, man. I'm here to enjoy myself, answer some questions, and just have a good time.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you attending.
Oh, and by the way, I'm in Monroe County, Georgia. So shout out to being outside of Metro Atlanta to my friends here near Juliet in Monroe County in Forsyth, Georgia. So I'm just happy to be traveling, man. You got me so excited.
I know that you're busy as ever on the road in this Democratic runoff. In this runoff, or this general election runoff, rather. Where are you're coming to us from a bookstore on the road here, right? Where are you coming to us from right now?
I'm coming from Juanita's Words and Music, House of Words and Music, man. I mean, we got a chance to speak to some local folks here. I'm sure we'll get into Coal Ash a little bit later, but right next door in Juliet, Georgia, about 15 minutes away, that community is dealing with the coal ash issue. I could have been at home tonight, but we want to be here in Monroe County, and we want to make sure that this campaign extends throughout the 159 counties in Georgia. We've been to over 60 counties. And I'm in Forsyth, Georgia today, which is in Monroe County, Georgia. So I live in Forsyth County. So not to get it mixed up, there's Forsyth County, Georgia.
It's two different.
And there's Forsyth. So I'm here, and the struggle that we've seen in this part of the state and the opportunities are very real. And outside of the COVID-19 challenges that we've all faced as a state, we know that the water contamination in Monroe County and in Juliet, Georgia, are at the top of our agenda and our candidacy. So again, I'm here to have a good time, man. And shout out to Juanita and to all the residents here in Monroe County, Georgia.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Steve. Without any further ado, why don't you take it away with our first few questions in our first section?
Yeah, well, I'd just like to say real briefly, I sure do thank Better Savannah for making this kind of thing available. It's a great asset to have live video of the contestants and the people that are out there trying to be public servants and make it work. And I'm especially interested in meeting you, Daniel. I've been very interested in Vogtle for a long time. I'm, of course, very interested in renewable energy and solar, wind. I've been to offshore wind conferences all over the world. And there's just so much opportunity. And this is an opportunity right now to give people that hear this, and I hope eventually a lot of people do, a much better idea of what the PSC is, the Public Service Commission. And it's really something that I hope we can get into, not too deep, but deep enough that it'll really provide some significant information to people that need to know it. I'm going to go over briefly what the PSC is. The Georgia Public Service Commission is the most important governmental institution most Georgians know next to nothing about. Indeed, it seems like many Georgians don't know that it exists at all. According to one expert, the PSC is by far the most important commission in Georgia when it comes to your money. This lack of public awareness has contributed to the unchecked growth of an enormous public debt. Very few citizens are aware that they are on the hook for almost $30 billion to pay for Southern Company's cost overruns on the construction of 2 new nuclear reactors at Plant Vogtle near Augusta. A very heavy burden Georgians will be paying for the rest of their lives. This Vogtle project is the only surviving nuclear reactor construction still underway in the USA. It is the most expensive solar reactor construction project in the world. Yeah, the entire world, ever. It's the most expensive, and Georgians are going to pay for it out of their pockets. The Vogtle overruns are roughly equal to the entire Georgia state budget for a year. Just Vogtle equals 1 year Georgia government, 100% budget. Southern Company also reaps the highest profits of any American regulated private electric utility. PSC's responsibilities also, besides power, Vogtle, Southern Georgia Power, they include oversight of Georgia's sole monopoly private utility, Georgia Power, and its owner, Southern Company. The PSC is responsible for approving Georgia Power's plans and monitoring and approving its legislated guaranteed cost recovery and profit. There's 2 other things the PSC is responsible for that are significant. One is telecommunications, and the other is natural gas. But both of these functions have been deregulated. That is, their prices and services are now established through competition between numerous competing companies. For telecommunications and natural gas, the PSC's role is limited to ensuring that the market is kept competitive and customer problems are addressed, and that gas operations are safe. This is not the case for Georgia Power, which has monopoly rights with price, generation, and transmission and billing overseen by the PSC. So the PSC is the responsible party for what Georgia Power does. With the election of Joe Biden to the presidency, the USA will be rejoining the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, known as the IPCC, and will be reaffirming its commission to the Paris Accords resolution to hold global warming increases to less than 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The PSC will play a central role in meeting Georgia and America's commitment for rapid conversion from dirty fossil fuel generated electricity to clean renewable electricity. If the PSC is to meet the responsibilities successfully in this decade and for the rest of the 21st century, which is already 1/5 over, it's hard to believe, it must become more transparent, inclusive, proactive, and forward-thinking than it has ever been asked to be in the past century. Very briefly, that is the role and the status of the PSC today. So
that's a lot to digest.
It is, but hopefully it was somewhat lucid. I'd like to go ahead and just get on to the questions and give you a chance to talk. We're very interested in what you got to say. And I think the first thing I'd like to address is something you probably thought about a bit, and that is what I call the elephant in the living room with the PSC. And that is that what are now referred to as the PSC district commissioners are actually commissioners at large, because they are elected by statewide vote, not by the voters in any particular district. And the question to you is, should the PSC district representatives be elected only by voters in their district rather than by a statewide election, which seems to take away the credibility and the responsibility of the district representatives?
I mean, it depends on who you ask. You know, for somebody like myself who lives in North Georgia, I live in Forsyth County, Georgia. And again, to both of you, thank you for the opportunity to be able to share this conversation and to share my position on many of the things that you brought up, Steve, in your conversation. I think it's important for us to understand, to your point, if you live in Atlanta, that's District 3, that's Fulton, DeKalb, and Clayton. However, to your point, Steve, that is a statewide election. And the question is, could there be more balance of power, which is really what we get down to. And the way the Public Service Commission structure is set up, that literally does not leave an opportunity for folks in that district to be able to vote for this. So the short answer is it should be by district. I'm saying that in direct opposition to, I have a competitive advantage. I live in North Georgia, for example. The majority of North Georgia counties have gone for Donald Trump. However, because of counties like Chatham and Glenn and Richmond County and so many other counties around the state of Georgia that overperformed and that came out and that did their part, I'm able to be in a runoff. I know my good friend Robert Bryant, who is from Savannah. You know, Chatham County District 1 was on the ballot this year, and I'm very fortunate and privileged to have made it into a runoff. I wish we had a chance on January 5th to elect 2 public service commissioners to the Public Service Commission, but unfortunately, we were able to do enough to get to this point, and I'm privileged to be here. But I think that model is going to continue to be looked at. I know there was a lawsuit filed earlier this year. It's going to be a big challenge because the way the current statewide constitutional office structure is set up, it is only set up for it to be a statewide election. So I think that we're going to have a challenge unless the current legislative body sees an opportunity there, which I don't think they will, because what we've seen this last election is counties that have traditionally outside of Metro Atlanta that have not been blue counties are now increasingly growing. The demographics are changing, the educational levels are changing, the communities and the diverse makeup of those communities are changing. And I don't think that our current legislative body wants to take that risk to put them in a position to potentially lose 2 or 3 of these seats in any given election.
Well, that's a good answer. I wonder if there's a litigative way of doing it with voting suppression. But
well, that was actually the lawsuit filed that it was about voter suppression. It was filed, if I'm not mistaken, in Fulton County. And that lawsuit alleges that it's not only voter suppression, but that it causes there to not be equal or fair representation at the Public Service Commission. It actually did use your argument of representation in a particular district. Because again, to use the Atlanta model, Fulton, DeKalb, and Clayton are not only 3 of the most diverse counties in the state of Georgia, but they're 3 of the most democratic. If there were a blue wall in Georgia, it would be Fulton, DeKalb, and Clayton. And so we understand that those 3 counties alone would give us every single election cycle at least 1 Democrat. And let's be honest, I mean, that Democrat would likely be a person of color. So it's really important for us to understand the demographics and the dynamics and how complicated it is. But I think we would all agree it's by design. It's been like this for a long time. But, you know, the Public Service Commission, in your intro, is one of the most powerful and influential positions in Georgia. And strategically, we see the influence from utility industry, specifically Georgia Power and Southern Company, and the grip that they've had on the commissioners that have served over the past several decades.
Thank you. Thank you. Georgia Power customers must pay for electricity according to PSC regulated processes and rates. Basically, this is a form of taxation with only the PSC to represent the public's interest. Yet most Georgians have little or no knowledge of the PSC and its purpose. Should the PSC be more proactive in informing the public about the PSC activities and responsibilities? And if so, how can this be accomplished?
Without a doubt, that's probably the easiest question I'm gonna get tonight. There's no way that individuals around this state. Let me share this story with you. I traveled to Columbus, Georgia, and Albany, Georgia earlier this year after my primary with my friend John Knoll. John Knoll ran as a Democrat. We had a primary, and in at least 3 of the stops between Columbus and Albany, I had elected officials that did not even know the functionality of the Public Service Commission. If elected officials in this state don't know, then people don't know. When you have a commission of 5 members that are virtually unseen, what happens is people just don't know that the Public Service Commission is a commission that even deals with their utility bills. When you say Public Service Commission, I have people right now that ask me if it's the Public Safety Commission because they think it has something to do with law enforcement, right? So we have to do a better job, but let's be very honest and direct. You mentioned earlier that we have a $30 billion nuclear project in the state of Georgia. For them to hold town halls and to educate the people means that these cost overruns would not be able to be rubber stamped each and every time, because an educated electorate is an electorate that's more involved. We currently have 5 commissioners that overwhelmingly take money from the utility companies in which they regulate. And I wish Mr. McDonald were here to defend himself, because 85% of his campaign financing over the last 2 election cycles have come from utility companies. I mean, it's open record. It's not an indictment I'm making against them. These individuals are taking money in these areas. So when you talk about voter education, let me share this with people. Number 1, the Public Service Commission is a 6-year term. It's one of the longest terms in the state of Georgia outside the U.S. Senate. Number 2, public service commissioners make upwards of $118,000 a year. So you're talking about a 6-figure income that only rivals 2 or 3 other positions in the state of Georgia as far as the compensation that they get. And there's a quote that says it's hard to get a man to understand a thing when his salary depends on him not understanding it. And we have a commission that wants an uninformed ratepayer population, because in 2008, under the leadership of Governor Sonny Perdue, they defunded the Consumer Utility Council, which was the consumer body that worked with the staff at the PSC to maintain their information education. So here's what my plan is and how we want to fix that. Number 1, we want to activate historically Black colleges, community colleges, and technical colleges around the state, like Savannah State University, SCAD, other universities. We want to break the state up into 4 regions. Imagine if we had a coastal Georgia space where we had twice a year regional conferences where we came and we brought together utility company executives, public service commissioners, our interfaith community. Why aren't we bringing people together? When COVID-19 hit, there should have immediately been a utility stakeholder task force, which is what we called for, because we wanted people to understand how to navigate this process during a pandemic, because none of us knew where we were going to go. Now, 7 or 8 months later, where 23 million people run the risk of eviction and 205 million people in the United States run the risk of utility disconnection, no one knows what to do, where to go, or how to prevent these things from happening, because our Public Service Commission voted to end the moratorium, which means disconnection started back up in Georgia right in July, ahead of many other states in the union. So we've got a lot of work to do, and we're going to activate our college campuses around this state to make them energy hubs and institutes where we can extend learning, but also hold utility companies accountable.
Steve, let me jump in here and ask the follow-up. I'm gonna take this 1C question and then let you go on with 1D.
Right.
How much of this is on the legislature, Daniel? And in your opinion, do PSC commissioners as a whole and their staff think that's on your end, Daniel. Sorry.
I have no idea. I'm sorry.
No
about
worries.
That.
No worries. I know everybody's got phones still these days. The question was, in your opinion, does the PSC Commission, the commissioners and their staff, have a responsibility to be proactively advising the General Assembly when the existing laws that they are responsible for passing are no longer adequate or not founded on sound scientific consensus anymore, or just otherwise impede the interests of the Georgia citizens? Because I hear you that there's a lot of things the commission should be doing, but I'm wondering about the underlying legislature itself, and what's the role of the commission in advising that legislature? What do you think about that?
Well, the first problem with your question is that the public service commissioners that we currently have don't listen to their staff. I mean, the staff recommendations at the Public Service Commission for the past decade has year after year been against cost overruns going from Georgia Power to ratepayers. So the first thing we have to address is the fact that there is a staff of over 70 people with the Public Service Commission that gives recommendation based on information, based on the Vogtle monitoring report, based on the integrated resources plan. These individuals are very knowledgeable. You know, they have individuals that cover electric, gas, and other means such as cable, and they're giving and feeding them this information based on facts, based on what the data says. So I'm going to say something right now that's pretty unpopular for a Democrat to say, and I'm not going to blame the Republicans. Democrats and Republicans in 2009 voted on what we now know as construction work in progress. They voted to allow the Vogtle expansion to happen because there's so much money tied up from Southern Company into our elected officials. And many of them in 2009, to be fair, Democrats and Republicans, I don't think, understood the severity of what this project would cost. And I want to put this into perspective. This was initially a $14.8 billion project that was supposed to be completed in 2017. We are now looking at a project that is 5 years behind schedule, $14.5 billion more dollars, right? Because this is now a $29.6 billion project. So we're now looking at a situation where we're not only 5 years behind schedule, and I don't even believe we're going to make the 2021 mark that Georgia Power has announced. So let me be on record to say we're going to miss another one. We're now in a position where, due to a COVID outbreak at nuclear plant Vogtle, they've asked for an additional $1 billion, right? We're in a position where we will be paying for this for the next 60 years. And I want people to understand what that means. We will be paying for a nuclear construction right now in this state that is going to take almost 60 years just to pay off. And I don't know about you, but there's so much skin in the game. So to your question, Chuck, I think people need to understand, yes, the legislative body has to play more of an active role. We can't just put the onus on the PSC, but the PSC is where the buck is supposed to stop because they are the regulatory body. They hear the cases. When those dockets are presented to the Public Service Commission, they have to then respond, read the information, and make decisions on the best interest of the people. I have no problem with Georgia Power being profitable because they employ a lot of people. My problem is don't put all the skin in the game on the ratepayers and not penalize in any shape or form the shareholders and the executives of Georgia Power that are making a profit while folks are struggling. And that is a combination of legislative policy that has to be upgraded. And I'll give you one example. We should have capped Vogtle's overrun spending a long time ago. As long as Plant Vogtle goes over, and we know, and see, this is something that most people don't realize. Once Vogtle is completed, 3 and 4, or if it's completed, it becomes an asset of Georgia Power. So I want people to understand, not only does it become an asset, but they then can receive 12% of a profit off of that every year. So we're talking about a very complicated issue that we need to have legislative policies in place to prevent it, because all we're going to continue to see for the duration and the life of this project is an overburden on ratepayers, not just because of the Public Service Commission members, but because of a legislative body that has not put safeguards in place to cap the spending, whether it's coal ash cleanup or an expanded nuclear facility that's costing ratepayers $30 billion.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. Go ahead, yeah. Steve, go ahead with the next question.
Yeah, the next question kind of relates to your answer in a way. It's if you're elected, you'll be one Democrat on a commission that for a long time has been all white Republicans, usually white male Republicans. And how are you going to make your presence felt?
We're doing it right now. When's the last time you had a public service commissioner not run from an interview? You know, and I mean that with all sincerity. They don't show up. You know, when senior citizens on a fixed income are struggling because a base rate increase goes up and they have to decide between their medication and their utility bill, that's a problem. But you know who shows up for the senior citizens? The community, people like us and the AARP. When you look at these kids around the state who have nothing to do with the unemployment of their parents because we haven't put safeguards in place, we now see a challenge where a person's income is determining their children's outcome. And we don't have people standing up for them. So yes, will I be 1 out of 5 votes and likely be outvoted on multiple occasions? Yes. Will I be 1 Democrat against, 5 4 other Republicans? Yes. But will I be on shows like this? Will I continue to support Better Savannah and the Sierra Club, who I'm endorsed by, and the AFL-CIO, who I'm endorsed by? I'm going to travel around this state because here, our strategy is not to hide behind a desk at 244 Washington Street. Our strategy is to get my butt up out of that office, out of Atlanta, and go to every corner of Georgia that needs an answer on why their utility bills keep going up. In every corner of this state where kids are struggling with wireless broadband, they deserve an answer. And we have a public service commission. I'm going to be very direct with what I'm saying. We have a public service commission that hides behind the fact that they're a shadow organization. And I mean that with all sincerity. They're an organization that is able to fly low enough under the radar that if they don't say anything, they don't get exposed. And the reason why we're having this conversation and so much more in Georgia is because this year, COVID-19 has changed the game. You got folks that are unemployed that can't keep their lights on. You got a gentleman in Griffin, Georgia right now that's a diabetic who's had no power for 88 days. And he has to go to a local convenience store every day to get a bag of ice so his insulin doesn't go bad because he can't plug up his refrigerator. These stories are coming out. And now that people are noticing, hey, you mean to tell me there are 5 people in Atlanta that are making decisions for my light bill? You mean to tell me my kid that's at home that I have to drive to Wendy's or Burger King or McDonald's just to get on the internet to do homework? There's a commission that has an impact or an influence on all these areas. So while COVID-19 has had a strikingly damaging impact on our community, and my heart goes out to those who have lost loved ones. But my point is this, the perfect storm that has happened this year called COVID-19 has actually lifted up the profile of the Public Service Commission, and we wouldn't be having this much of a conversation outside of Vogtle if it hadn't been for so many hurting Georgians that are around this state right now.
Daniel, that's great. I think it could work. Next thing I would like to ask is something specific about Vogtle. The PSC has already approved much of the soaring Vogtle construction costs and will soon be asked to approve up to $2.5 billion more.
That's correct.
Vogtle is already the most expensive nuclear construction project in the world by far, bar none. And the meter is still running. When we say 30 billion, we don't know, it could be 40 billion. They've not turned in their cost, their reimbursement request yet. Georgia is already the 5th most expensive state for electricity. And when the Vogtle overruns begin to be collected, it will almost certainly be the most expensive state in the United States when they start covering the Vogtle expenses. How do you intend to deal with these unprecedented expenses and concomitant guaranteed profits? Do you favor terminating the Vogtle project? If not, how should Southern Company be held responsible for this financial catastrophe?
There are only 3 ways that this ends. And, I want to continue to be very direct and forthright in my answers. Vogtle whether the switch gets turned on or not, Georgians are paying for it. You mentioned earlier that Georgia Power and Plant Vogtle is the only nuclear project currently in the U.S. There was another one in South Carolina, and it went bankrupt. And most people don't realize the impact of Westinghouse and the bankruptcy in South Carolina and how that impacted Georgians. And the only 3 ways this ends is, number 1, you get a commission that not only caps the overruns being pushed onto ratepayers, but you get some kind of reimbursement. I think that we need to seriously consider legislative action where we can start going to Chuck's point, where we say, look, there are going to be significant reimbursement payments going to ratepayers. And why should that even be a question? If you're telling me that I'm paying for something that may or may not ever go online, that's a problem within itself. And we're paying for it. What most people need to realize, over a decade, out of the 2.6 million Georgia Power customers, they've paid $1,000, okay, over a decade. Now, you multiply $1,000 per family by 2.6 million, and you tell me that number. Over this period, churches, mosques, and synagogues, including our schools, our public schools, have paid upwards of 10 to 12,000 over the past decade. Now, when you add up all those numbers, there has to be some kind of fair remedy, or we're going to continue to use these mathematical equations that don't make sense. They don't add up. So I think, one, reimbursement is an option. Number two, we've got to cap the spending. Georgia Power has been profitable year after year. I have not heard one gripe from a shareholder at Georgia Power. And we need to make sure that, and here's a model that would have worked before I finish this answer. What we should have done from the beginning, if we were going to charge ratepayers, is we should have done it at a 50% ratepayer charge and 50% shareholder charge. If you were going to charge anyone, it should have been skin in the game on both sides. Now, I wouldn't have personally voted to put those overruns on there, because I felt from the beginning this was going to be a very fiscally irresponsible decision, because if you look at banks around the U.S., they're not funding these. These are federal loan guarantees, and these are decisions that are being made at the state level. So when you look at what's being guaranteed, I don't see how they would have even been able to get what bank would keep giving you billions of dollars with no rate of return? But so we understand that. So if we're not shifting the cost and having a person like myself who said, I'm not going to vote yes on any ratepayer increase, especially one that directly has an impact on Vogtle charges. We already just saw the Public Service Commission vote to get what's called COVID recovery costs. They're getting $8 million back because folks that couldn't pay their bills weren't paying in time, and they apparently have lost money. There's no transparency in that process. Now, the third and final and probably most extreme measure is some kind of lawsuit. Right now, I'm not able to say, because I don't have access to all the information, but I know what happened in South Carolina was there was a coalition built of all the interfaith community. I was just going to mention the South Carolina project. Yep. Yeah. And they went to the Attorney General and they said, look, this project is not only unconstitutional, but the way in which they're passing these overruns on is criminal. And their Attorney General agreed with them. So, I mean, I'm just putting it out there that there are only three ways this end. I mean, the president of Scana Energy was indicted. I mean, I can't tell you what legal remedies are out there. What I can say is what is happening is not normal. And either Georgia Power has to come to the table and help us resolve the issue, or it's going to go in a direction that's going to put all of Georgia in a bad position. I think we're smart enough to solve the problem, but we got to both be able to come to the table. And that's what I plan on doing when I'm elected.
Let me follow up. Oh, sorry, Steve.
Follow up on that is there is a fourth way. In a lot of places have done this. They've deregulated. And right here in Georgia, Atlanta Gas Light was deregulated, and it wasn't a problem. It seemed to work for people well. People are doing okay. They're not getting Vogels. They're not getting screwed. Many big electrical generation utilities that were regulated are now deregulated. It can happen. It works. It seems to be working okay in a lot of places in the United States. So why is it that that's off the table? Why aren't we talking about deregulating Georgia Power?
2 words: Georgia Power. I mean,
you mean the third word, Georgia Power's lobby?
Yeah,
right? I mean, Power's
the
lobby.
largest lobby in Georgia is Georgia Power, and one of the largest in the United States is Southern Company. I mean, let's just be very direct. I'm here because I feel that we need to have fearless politicians and elected officials and public servants that's going to say exactly what needs to be said, exactly how it should be said. We got to draw a line in the sand. Unfortunately, we're at a point where we're so far in this position where we have to stand up, not because we're trying to draw a line in the sand, but because we have been so overwhelmingly unfair and unbalanced in our position and our approach to ratepayers and to consumers in this state. Democratic, Republican, Libertarian, Independent, I don't care. Kilowatt hours don't know a political party. And we're in a position now because individuals have been taken advantage of. And I think that, you know, your question about deregulation, I just don't think it's something that would happen in the foreseeable future. I'm an optimist, but I'm not optimistic about something like that happening in the foreseeable future.
Let me ask a follow-up question about Vogtle. I'm reminded of one of Dave Chappelle's most recent stand-ups where he's talking about the game of 3-card Monte, right? I don't know if you saw this in the last year. And when he realizes all of these players, they're all in on it. And I can hear, I'm trying to remember, Daniel, what is the state representative's name who used to play for the Falcons, who's big in the labor movement?
Dewey McClain?
Yeah, McClain. I can hear Dewey's voice now talking about the unionized jobs that are on this project.
Yeah.
But what if, as a ratepayer, a lot of the ratepayers, they just understand all of those entities are in on it, right? You know, those union guys, they want the hours, you know, they want the pay, and they want the good pay and organized benefits, right? Southern Company wants its profits, right? And at the end of the day, Georgians want to be able to flick on the light switch and know that the light's going to turn on. I guess I kind of understand, but my point here is just it feels like everybody, when it comes to Vogtle, like you said, both parties are responsible. This is not one party did this. Both parties voted for this in the last 2 decades. Both parties have pushed for this in some form or fashion. And so it just, at the end of the day, it just feels like, well, everybody's already all in on it. It's hard to walk away when you're pot committed. You know, I mean, do you just plan, if you were elected, to go to the legislative session and beg the legislators to do something? I mean, again, I'm just struggling with what's this term going to look like for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the beauty of having a 6-year term. You know, and I think you're right. You know, we're in a position where we have to address the issues. I mean, I wasn't endorsed by the AFL-CIO for no reason. I mean, they know my stance on Vogtle and what I do. I think the difference in what they saw in me as a candidate is that I'm offering solutions that address the issue of our workers and our laborers. One, we have to create safe environments for them to be able to work and thrive in. 2, we have to make sure, to a question brought up earlier, there's no education. Right? There are policies that we can replicate that have been done around the country that can be adopted right here in Georgia. So I think the problem is we haven't given those individuals you mentioned, Chuck, the option, right? And that's the problem. If labor feels that if this project stops, their jobs go away, then that's a challenge. And that's why we have to articulate to them $14.5 billion could have been spent in so many other ways that could have not only increased labor jobs, but they could have expanded opportunities for renewables in the state of Georgia. And I think we need to make sure that when we say we're for a clean energy future, my opponent likes to try and scare people and say, well, don't elect a socialist to the Public Service Commission. Look, this has nothing to do with political ideology. I don't even think public service commissioners should have to run as Democrat or Republican. I think they should just run as public service commissioners. Another conversation for another day. But we need to start counterpunching when it comes to the lack of information that keeps folks in this 3-card Monte game that you talked about, because people don't know. You know, I'm someone that stands on my faith. There's a scripture that says, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. And people in the community, what they don't know is causing them to feel like what's not normal is okay. And we have to change that. So one of the things I want to do on my 6-year term is there's a program at the University of Michigan State University called the Institute of Public Utilities. I want to create something which is a partnership similar to what I mentioned earlier with our HBCUs, our technical colleges like Georgia Tech. We want to begin to bring stakeholders to the table, and we want to look at what does the next 5 years look like, 10 years, 15 years. If we start thinking about that as a community, for example, autonomous driving is going to take away 3.5 million truck driving jobs in the next 7 years, no matter what we do. So we can gripe about how much we want to keep the jobs that we quote unquote have been convinced are the jobs that are in our best interest. But what's going to happen is when those jobs get taken away, then you're stuck and there's nothing else for you. So I think we have to do a better job of giving an alternative. I think I would have to be a commissioner that works on an alternative versus just saying what we shouldn't do. If we're not given a solution, we're part of the problem. And I think that, one, I want to work with the legislative body. I'm not going to beg them, but I'm going to go with documentation and information. And I'm going to say, look, here's what is happening right now in Georgia, and here's how we can fix it. I think that if you can get to more, especially newly elected officials, and you can work with folks that are not stuck in their ways, I think they would be more apt to listen a little bit more, because even fiscal conservatives, some of which are supporting me right in Juliet, Georgia, are saying, look, Daniel, I'm fiscally conservative. I don't like Bubba. And they're saying it not because he's a bad guy, but because they're counting the same numbers we are when they look at their utility bills.
Let me ask you a follow-up question, just a very quick follow-up question.
Yeah.
Your opponent is 82 years old. You know, he's seeking another 6-year term,
which means he'll be 89 by the time he finishes it.
Right. You know, and with all due respect to Steve and our founder and chairman, John McMasters, who are in a previous generation, I think something I've been working on in politics is about demanding generational accountability. And I believe that, you know, these generations before us have kind of had their chance at the wheel, so to speak. And I just want your thoughts on, you know, whether or not you think somebody who's been in that seat for that long and had been around Georgia politics for this long, whether they've got a handle on a vision of where the next 30 or 40 or 50 years are going. I mean, I think that's really a concern for anybody, you know, say a Generation X and the millennial generation like you and I are in. Go ahead.
I think that the easiest way to answer that is that, you know, we all have points in our life when we have to realize what we have the capacity to do and when it's time to tap out. I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say that we don't see it from elected officials across the board. Again, to my point, I try to be a straight shooter. I see myself more as a statesman than a politician. I think Democrats and Republicans sometimes serve in a position for so long that they fail to look progressively in the future, because they feel that they've been around so long that they know what's right. Like, I have a quote on my wall that says, "Listen to understand and not to respond." And I think we have a lot of elected officials that feel like they know what's best for the generation coming up. So they're going to stay there until they feel like we're ready, until they're ready to turn it over. And I think that's the wrong thing to do across the board. In Bubba's case, he said on 3 separate occasions that I've counted that he was retiring. He announced that on multiple occasions in multiple public forums. I think what's going to happen is what we saw with 2 past commissioners, including Stan Wise and also
Trisha Pridemore. Yep.
Yeah, with Trisha Pridemore. I think
that's
Bubba
correct.
Clearly was going to step down. I think Bubba knew he was ready to step down, but the Republican Party and Georgia Power fundamentally understood that an open race without an incumbent was a race that would be much more competitive and would be much more watched. I think if I was going up against some gentleman that was a conservative from the Republican Party, that would have been a much more competitive race, because here I am with my background. They would have had to put up someone or recruit someone that could do that. I personally believe, and I can't speak on behalf of my opponent, but I wish he were here to answer this question for himself. Yeah. I think what he's doing is going to, you know, work to, in his mind, hopefully get reelected, which we're not going to let happen. And I think what he would like to see happen is for Governor Kemp to appoint someone to fill out the duration of his term. We've seen that in the Republican playbook on more than one occasion.
It's happened twice in the last 2 decades. No, I appreciate that. I really appreciate that candid response. Steve, why don't we go to section 3? Steve, on that, section, and why don't we go with those questions next?
Yeah, I think, well, there's really 2 questions I think that I'd like to get answered before the end of this interview. Mm-hmm. And one of them has to do with something that I just don't hear talked about at all. But the fact is that many Georgians are concerned that Georgia Power shareholders are being granted the right by the PSC to spend almost unlimited amounts on advertising, lobbying, public relations, not out of their own profits, but out of ratepayer charges. Why does a utility private corporation that has guaranteed customers, guaranteed profits, why do they need to be advertising? Why do they need to be running full-page ads in the HAC and on television all the time? What is one single reason why the general public should be paying for them to advertise? It doesn't serve the general public's interest at all. Yet the PSC approves over and over and over again their bills, and they add the profit onto those bills, and they're basically charging the chicken for the cost of going to the chicken processing plant. The whole thing is a completely unfair thing, and so how do you feel about these business expenses that have nothing to do with a monopoly corporation with guaranteed profits?
I mean, this is going to be the quickest answer I give. I don't agree with it at all. I think it's unfortunately that is a part of a political scheme that we're seeing where they try to get the favorability of people because they're using that platform. And the Public Service Commission is supposed to regulate the utility companies and not be in partnership with them. And that's what's happening. We're seeing too much collaboration and not enough accountability.
Yep. I hope that you're able to make that public understand that issue, because I don't think people would like it if they thought about it. It's a good segue. You're talking about you want to have positive things, not just negatives. You want to have things that people can do that they'll really be beneficial to them, not just attack Vogtle. But if people think about it, if the 30 or 40 billion dollars that have gone down the drain for Vogtle were made available to do clean energy, Georgia could have hundreds of thousands of jobs that would last for decades, forever. And it would be, Georgia would be like the technological hero of the Western world or the whole world. And it's just a gigantic missed opportunity when you sink that much money into a project which is ill-conceived at a time when you should be doing something 180 degrees different. And this comes back to the whole question about, as the consequences of global warming become ever more pronounced and the United States rejoins the worldwide intergovernment panel on climate change, the IPCC, and the Paris Accords, the PSC's actions will become much more publicly scrutinized. Due to the intermittent nature of wind and solar energy, the fundamental infrastructure necessary for their success, wind and solar, clean energy, is a transmission system which is open and allows for free competition between different sources of electrical energy, and allows people to move the electricity around. As the wind picks up, the sun goes down, things change in the clean energy renewable world. And to do this, you have to have a very advanced grid. And the grid that Georgia Power has in Georgia is not up to this now. And South Carolina has already created a commission to study electricity market reform measures and regional transmission strategies. And do you think that in order to get ready to move forward with clean energy, to do the prerequisite, that Georgia should create a commission too, and it should be cooperating with South Carolina's commission, because a regional electricity market would be good for everybody in the Southeast. That's what the experts say. What do you think?
I agree 1,000%. Not only should we be working with South Carolina on their study, we should be working with the state of Florida on their expansion of electric vehicle charging stations. We have to think about innovation. When you think about that $14.5 billion number in cost overruns, let's consider the fact that the last two hurricanes that hit coastal Georgia cost collectively $3 to $5 billion. If we're not investing into renewable and clean tech that can help us to recover quickly, whether it's battery storage, looking at solar, we need to look at options and put everything on the table, because Georgia's climate, especially in those parts of the state where we've overwhelmingly been hit from an agricultural standpoint, they need options and new measures that upgrade and bring us into, from an innovative standpoint, that bring us up to speed to protect our most vulnerable communities. There's an opportunity that for whatever reason we're running away from, instead of just making sure that we look at how we are making new policies around electricity, but also creating new measures that can take us into the future and prevent us from, being compromised by extreme weather.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're going to have huge challenges to meet the 3.6 degree limit from the IPCC, from the Paris Accords,
yes,
which we're going to be rejoining. And I think Georgia, instead of trying to resist it, Georgia should say, we can be a leader in this. We can be a leader in this. We can make this happen. And it's going to require a lot of multiple things going on at the same time. Speaking of that, all around the world, the countries and the states, California, New Jersey, most countries in Germany's a good one, have had huge success in solar energy generation. And the way they've done it is almost entirely with residential solar users. And what they do and what works is to say, we're going to put a feed-in tariff. We're going to make it where if you produce solar energy, clean energy, we're going to pay you what it's worth. In Germany, they're paying 50 cents a kilowatt hour for it. And if it was half that much in Georgia, we would have solar on every roof in the state. And we wouldn't have to have any Vogtles. And we would have an incredible number of jobs building and manufacturing and implementing solar panels. But Georgia Power doesn't like that, because if every time somebody puts solar panels on their roof, they lose a customer and they gain a competitor. People say, so you can't do that. And I say, why is it that it's Georgia's responsibility to make Georgia Power fat, dumb, and happy? I think that it's, who cares what they want? I think that Georgia should incentivize rooftop solar, because that is the best thing for me. Because if you pay to put solar on your roof, that power goes into the grid and it benefits all of the users. And it is the best way to go. Georgia Power's backing lots and lots of industrial scale things where they cover acre after acre after acre of land with solar panels. I'm not against that, but they're doing that instead of advocating rooftop solar, which is much, much more effective and has much more potential. What do you think of that?
So, for the sake of time, I'll say this. One of the things that I'm going to be doing after January 5th is I will be at the legislative sessions once they're had, and I will work with our elected officials in the House and the Senate to make sure that we understand that. And I'll give you an example. I have an EMC. I don't have Georgia Power. And our EMC just announced today, and remember, Sawney EMC, where I live in Forsyth County, which is North Georgia, has a tremendously wide reach in Republican-led counties. And they just announced today that as of 2021, utility rates would be lowered and investments would be shifted towards renewable energy in North Georgia. Why can't we follow that model? If it's working in North Georgia, why can't we use that same model in coastal Georgia or rural Georgia? So my quick response to that is we need to make sure that we're working on the policy side. Most folks don't have $10,000 to $15,000 in their pockets to just go put solar on their rooftop. So we need to create policies and incentives, one, that align with the industry. Two, we got to work with the legislative body to remove the barriers for county seats. Because look, next year, after the presidential election and the U.S. Senate races and the Public Service Commission, we have municipal elections coming up, right? These local elections matter. And if we can get the local communities and counties on board, like Chatham and in Richmond County, Muskogee, where I'm from, if we can get local county commissions on board with city council, and we can work on models that work, I can guarantee you it will change. And here's why I know that will change. Because the movie industry, once it started generating a large amount of revenue, everybody wanted to open their counties to do business with the industry because they saw the revenue opportunities. If we can replicate what's been done in Dalton around solar manufacturing, creating jobs in some of these counties that have been, quite frankly, left behind, I think that these legislators, whether they're Democrat or Republican, will listen. They might not be as quick or as progressive, but they would be willing to open their doors to what works if they can see that they can get the support they need to pass those kinds of policies.
Daniel, your answer there segues perfectly into our final question. Steve, I'm going to ask this last question on 4C here, and then we'll let Daniel get some time here to give us kind of wrapping up thoughts. The reason why your answer fits so perfectly as a segue, because this last question is about an issue that if you follow Better Savannah, if you know our founder, John McMasters, and I at all, this issue is something I've been focused on for about the last 5 years, and it's the issue of preemption, okay? And whether it's the minimum wage or clean energy, the state preempts local governments, which flies in the face of local control, which has always been the mantra of your opponent's party for the last 20 years. So let me ask this question. Georgia Power has entered into an agreement with Google and several other major corporations, think Facebook, all of the big tech giants, right? PSC, Georgia Power, has allowed them to enter into an agreement where Georgia Power will supply these companies with 100% clean energy, because that's what they want, Daniel, right? So, however, Georgia Power is not required. We're not even allowed, like Savannah or Athens, to demand 100% clean energy for our market, for where we are, right? So my question simply for you here is, why do multinational corporations get a fast lane for what they want in this state in terms of energy output, but coastal cities like ours, who are very, very sensitive to the rising sea levels, which are a direct result of this climate change, which is why we're pushing for such clean energy resources. Do you think that's something you could get changed in the next 6 years?
I actually do. I'm very privileged outside of my work with the Department of Energy and with the EPA under the Obama administration. We were able to work in what we are in Region 4 of the EPA. And we actually looked at opportunities. And one of the biggest models we saw in a predominantly Republican area was what they did in the lower ninth ward of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina and the investment that drove that space. And I think you're absolutely right, Chuck. When you look at businesses around this country, they not only get a blank check, but when they mess up, they get bailed out. And our counties don't have that same luxury. And I want to be very clear about this next statement I'm going to make. What you're saying, Chuck, it benefits Republicans, it benefits Democrats. It doesn't matter where you are. When you level the playing field and you don't have we don't have the money. Silicon Valley is rushing into Georgia. I see it where I live. The deepening of the Savannah port, we're seeing it on every corner of our state. You're absolutely right about sea level rise, but I'll also add to that acidification. As our temperature gets hotter, our fisheries are beginning to die out. We're not talking about plastic pollution. It's so much different issues that we're not faced with. So for me, I think we need to remove those barriers and all that, the BS, quite frankly, that's blocking local officials from trying to create innovation in their own communities. We can no longer create barriers of entry when counties are struggling. Right here where I'm at today in Monroe County, you have at least 3 cities in this county that are struggling just for wireless broadband expansion. And we're not even talking about the space that you just mentioned with solar. We're talking about just investing into communities and getting out of their way to give them the same opportunities that we're giving these big corporations. So I agree with you. I think we need to do better. The way I think I can be effective on that is because when we get, again, out of 244 Washington Street, where the Public Service Commission is, and we start sitting down with the chambers of commerce, I think the chambers, surprisingly, are going to be unlikely supporters because they're going to see how much money, especially those chambers that are in these smaller counties that are wanting to drive business. Imagine if Georgia Southern was given a grant to do wind exploration off the coast of Georgia, and we were able to create a mechanism in place that can spur economic activity and business development. What county doesn't want to compete? And I think if we can come from a competitive standpoint and show them how we can replicate those models, I think it would work. So that's what I'm going to be really focused on because, at the end of the day, Georgia can't tout that we're the best state to do business when just Atlanta is doing well. And then every other county around the state is struggling because we're blocking every opportunity for them to succeed.
Man, Daniel, I appreciate that rock star answer right there. While it lets you gather your thoughts for a conclusion, Steve Willis, friend of the committee, you did a lot of research. You're a consummate thought leader on these issues. I want to give you a moment here to maybe give some of your closing thoughts on the answers that you heard. We've just gotten, a full 45, 50 minutes, almost an hour here with the candidate Daniel Blackman. What are your closing thoughts, Steve?
Well, my closing thoughts are that I really enjoyed your answers, Daniel. I thought they showed an awful lot of creativity and a lot of insight into what we need to do. I personally think that we need to be very aware of what's actually been going on for the last 5 or 10 years. We've got whole states burning down. We've got places right here in Chatham County that get flooded all the time that didn't used to get flooded. We've got hurricanes hitting us like, every other day, it seems like. We've got a lot of problems that are caused by global warming. And it's something that I don't think people are still accepting is not a problem or a possibility. It's just now. It's right now. And if we don't start cutting back on the amount of carbon we're pumping into the atmosphere now, right now, we're going to not be able to get out of the hole. We're going to commit suicide by burying ourselves. And we're doing it right now. And so what my thought is that I think you're definitely in the right direction at the right time. And I certainly want to support you every way I can. Maybe that doesn't sound very neutral, but that's the way that's after I heard your answers, that's the way I feel. But I think that what is absolutely essential is that people have got to understand that converting to clean energy is going to be the biggest job producer that the United States and the world has ever seen. And it's going to be the biggest leveler because it's going to give opportunities to people at every level of our society. And if we do it the way it should be done, well and fast, it's going to be a gigantic boost to our economy. And I think people, somehow that doesn't sink in. I think in the back of people's minds, they know that could happen, but they don't want to build, they've got to change their thinking around because it'll be a different world. But that different world is happening, and it's happening right now, and it's happening a lot all around the world. 2 years ago, I spent a month in China, and it's incredible. That whole country is converting to clean energy. They've got enormous investments in clean energy. They're going to be the world leader in clean energy. If we keep dragging our heels, we're going to be the exact opposite of China. And I don't think that's what we want to be. We don't want to be the world's slowest developer, the slowest adopter. And that's my takeaway. And I think that the people really got to grasp the PSC is the place where the expertise and the push and the explanation to not just the public, but to the General Assembly needs to happen. But that's a big job for you. You need a lot of help. But I hope you're there to at least get started.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, if you want to have anybody in the chat put any the information, but make sure here in your closing thoughts, you make sure people find out how to get in touch with you, donate, support, volunteer. There's a lot of attention being paid to federal races that are also on the same ballot as yours on January 5th. But, as a state and local independent committee, we are obviously exclusively focused on Georgia and Georgia alone. And so I just want to give you a chance to give us your closing thoughts. And John McMasters, if you're out there listening, I'm sure you are, if you'll come on back to the computer in a few minutes to help us close out in just a second. Daniel, what are your closing thoughts?
To John, Steve, and Chuck, I want to first thank you, Better Savannah. Something Chuck just said about the 2 U.S. Senate races. We fundamentally understand that our U.S. Senate race is important. A long time ago, a friend of mine said that one of the biggest challenges in politics is both parties swing for home runs and they don't go for singles and doubles. They don't get people on base. And when I think of that analogy, I think of counties like Chatham County and Glenn County and all of coastal Georgia. We just want to get you guys on base. Whether you are a Democrat or Republican, every county deserves an opportunity to compete and to not get left behind. I'm the son of a United States Army Ranger. I moved all over this country. I've lived in 2 separate countries abroad. And I want people to understand that I'm not someone that just thinks of one part of the state. Growing up outside of Atlanta, being educated in Atlanta, and then moving my family to North Georgia shows that this state means a lot to me. So I want to leave you all. One, don't forget the name Daniel Blackman on January 5th for the Public Service Commission. Do not solely think that the U.S. Senate races are the only races that impact your life, because the Public Service Commission impacts your pocketbook. It impacts your mother or father or grandparent on a fixed income. It affects your children. It affects your neighbors. And I want you to understand that what was mentioned earlier, Georgia has the 5th highest electric rates in the United States. That's going to continue to rise. And as we navigate our ways out of COVID-19, there are 2 things that we know. One, in a post-COVID world, we're going to have to rebuild and make sure that counties that have been left behind and that, quite frankly, have struggled are going to have some kind of blueprint to navigate into the future. But number 2, and most importantly, we've got to make a decision. What are we going to do when it comes to making decisions that our elected officials are making versus what big businesses and corporations have done to the integrity of our elections in our country? For everyone listening, the only way that we make progress is by finding ways to build up and not break down, finding ways to hold people accountable, like the coal ash situation that has been created, the nuclear expansion that we're seeing, and so many other issues. I actually implore everyone to research for yourself the Public Service Commission. Type in Bubba McDonald. Look at his voting record. Look at what he's done. Look at what he says. And then watch what I've said and the conversation we've had. And I hope that on January 5th, I've earned your support. We want to work to be a voice at the Public Service Commission for the people and not a blank check for the utility companies. So I want to thank you all for this opportunity. Thank you for having me. And I look forward to January 5th being a very successful opportunity for all of Georgia and not just a few counties. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you, Daniel. I want to just, on a personal note, I've known you a long time in and around politics. A lot of people who are concerned with, the direction of Georgia should remember that in the late 90s and early, it was either 98 or 2000, I think, it was the PSC that first went Republican.
That's right.
Right.
Bob Baker and Stan Wise.
That's right. And so it's a leading indicator, and while Joe Biden may have narrowly won, this election is much more about the future than about the present, like that election may have been. I just want to give, some closing thoughts on this race on behalf of Better Savannah. I would have loved to have seen Daniel's opponent, who's been there for many years, come and defend his record and be challenged. But I hope that everybody who's had a chance to watch this live, and the many of you locally here in Savannah that will watch it on replay, took away a lot of good policy discussion from this candidate. As I always like to remind everybody, Better Savannah is, in my view, of course, I'm biased, obviously, but Chatham County's leading independent expenditure committee focused on progressive policy outcomes. And there is no greater body at the state level where we need progressive policy outcomes than this PSC race. So while you may be, we're knocking every door and voting your ass off, as I keep hearing everybody say, please make sure to consider getting involved with this race before January 5th. Early voting, I believe, starts next week, right, Daniel?
Right.
Starts on Monday, right? So early voting starts next week. Please make sure, if you have not secured your absentee ballot already, to do so. John, I don't know if you're back here at the computer. If you have any closing thoughts of your own, I think you've been watching the whole time. We obviously appreciate your management of Better Savannah and stewardship of this organization to really push Chatham County and the state of Georgia in the futuristic direction we want to see it going. But if nobody's got any other thoughts, we really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time, Daniel.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you very much.
here on the coast.
DanielForGeorgia.com. Everybody go to DanielForGeorgia.com. Thank you so much.
There it is. John, you want to take us out?
Yeah, I will. Thanks, everyone. Great discussion. Let's make this happen. It's important, and this is the right guy for the job.
Thanks so much.
Good night, everyone.
Have a great night, everybody.